really appreciate being here. I am really, it was wonderful to take a quick tour of the classrooms. I was in 3 classes, and there seems to be some debate as to whether the groundhog saw his shadow today, which is a big thing. That, in addition to the math and reading and other things that we're talking about. So there are a lot of good things happening here, and I'm really grateful for you for giving me the ability to be here to make this big announcement. I'm gonna announce the 2016-17 budget on Tuesday, and I'm going to be announcing that I am trying to get a $200 million increase in basic education funding, and that is assuming that it's on top of the $377 million that was embedded in the compromise budget that we agreed to, still not passed fully, for 2015-16. That would be a historic increase in funding for basic education. And I'm committed to doing that according to the fair funding formula, so that we have a fair way to fund it. Up until the bipartisan commission, Pennsylvania was really one of, I think, 3 states in the United States without a fair funding formula. And as unbelievable as that was the way it was. So we now have one. It was actually put into place, or actually agreed to in a bipartisan fashion. The commission was chaired by a Republican senator, by a Republican House member, and it would help school districts all across Pennsylvania, but especially places like Reading. So I wanted to make that announcement. There are 2 other things I want to point out. There is a real, serious, and good reason why we should support public education, why that kind of increase in basic education should be something that is, we're not just doing that because we want Pennsylvania to get bragging rights as to where we are in educational funding. We absolutely need the state to step forward and make a commitment to public education. I live in York County, but I care deeply about whether the children in Reading School District get a good education, because if they don't, my life is going to be diminished. And same reason, if the children in my school district, Northeastern York County Public School District, don't get a good education, the folks in Reading, their lives, your lives, are diminished. This is a shared responsibility. All of us have to work together to make sure that we adequately fund education. I know you can't throw money at any problem, but you can't keep taking resources away from this most important function and hope to get to a good outcome. We need to invest in it. We need to make sure that school districts like Reading, like school districts in rural areas, everybody gets a fair shot, so that the teachers, the educators have the resources they need to provide the education we need them to provide. It's just that simple. The final thing is, places like Reading especially really need that fair funding formula. We have to make sure that funding in education in Pennsylvania, we have too high a reliance on the local property tax. There's a mathematical problem there. We're studying math upstairs. There's a real mathematical problem. If we don't do a good job of funding education at the state level, and we're 45th, I think, in the United States in terms of the percentage of funding that comes from the state. Now you can say, okay, we want to know what's going on overall funding. Well, no, it's in Pennsylvania, because we have 500 school districts, and because we have the alternative to a broad-based statewide tax is the local property tax. When we don't adequately fund public education at the state level, we're basically saying you have to rely on the alternative. And that alternative, in every place but I think Philadelphia, is the property tax. The property tax is a tax that is inherently mathematically unfair. Property tax is based on property values, and the poorer the tax base, the higher the tax rate has to be, and the less money you actually raise. It's just that simple. So to the extent we in Pennsylvania rely on that local property tax to fund something as essential as public education, we're scrimping in terms of the educational investment we're making in places like Reading and poor rural areas and suburban areas. We need to make sure that we're doing an adequate job, and that's in part using a fair funding formula, and that's in part making sure that we do an adequate job at the state level. I'm not saying we should be #1 in the country in terms of the percentage of funding that comes from the state for education, but we shouldn't be near the bottom. We should not be near the bottom, because that actually creates an additional burden on school districts like Reading. So those are the 3 things. I'm proud to announce that I am going to continue my support for investing in public education at the state level. Second, that it's really important for all of us to make sure that in this limited government, private sector system, government shouldn't do very many things, but what it should do well, and education is a key part of what it should do. So we need to get that right. That's something that's in all of our self-interest. That's the second thing. And the third thing is we especially need to make sure we distribute the money we invest wisely and fairly, so that school districts like Reading are not forced to rely on the property tax, but they have a backstop of a strong state commitment to public education. So that's, I'm proud to be here, proud to be a champion of public education, especially proud to make sure that what we raise and invest in Pennsylvania we do as fairly as we possibly can. So thank you again for having me, Dr.